arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, you see. And he said to his people, look, the people of Israel are too many and mighty. Come, let us deal shrewdly, that they might not fight against us if war breaks out. So here God had kept his promise. By the way, you go back to Abraham. Isn't that what God had promised Abraham too? That to all nations will bless you. You will be like the stars of the heavens, you see, like the sand on the seashore. And here we see God keeping his promise as his people multiply and multiply. And finally in Egypt we have several thousand. I think the text will say, if I remember correctly, it's about 10,000 people leave Egypt, former slaves under Moses, and go to the promised land. A few other places. Let's see. Genesis 47. I've got a bunch of texts here. What is there? They grew and multiplied exceedingly. Oh, yeah, what's going on in Genesis 40? Oh, that's where we are right now. Yeah. Genesis 9 is the one with Noah. Genesis 9 is the one with Noah. See if I got any other texts here for what it's worth. Yeah, Genesis 35:11. God blesses Jacob. Your name is Jacob. No longer will you be Jacob. You will be Israel. And God Almighty, God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. So you have this thing all over the place, usually in the context of divine blessing somehow. That God's blessing would show up in the people being fruitful, having children, and multiplying and so on. By the way, among the Jews, many children were always considered blessing or curse. Blessing, right, Leah? Wake up!
I'm awake.
I'm just kidding. By the way, she is starting to look very healthily pregnant. I asked her if she'd been through that before. Yeah, okay, well, we'll stop there. Let's move on to text here. I don't know if there's anything else in chapter 47. Let's see if anything else is coming. Yeah, verse 29 and following. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, Israel is not called Jacob here. It's called Israel. Because actually I think the text wants to teach us that while Israel will die, they will not die. Because the high story of Israel will go on through Israel's son. And the story of salvation will go on surprisingly through a son you would never expect, as we've talked about before. Jacob prepares for his death. He calls which of his sons to his son? Which suggests what, probably? Which got this kid in trouble at the beginning? Which son does he call? Joseph. Which suggests what?
Inheritance.
Inheritance. And if you go back to the beginning, that's what got Joseph in trouble in the first place, wasn't it? That his father always viewed Joseph as the firstborn, the favored one. Not Reuben, not Levi, not Judah. You have all those sons who come ahead of him. Why Joseph? Because that is the woman, his mother, that is the woman that Jacob worked for. That is the woman he wanted. That is the one he loved. And who ripped him off? Laban. Who gives him instead the weak-eyed one, Leah, right? And Joseph never considered Leah. I wouldn't say never considered her his wife. I guess he did, but not his real wife. Rachel was the one. And the firstborn son of Rachel was Joseph. He was the one who would be the heir. And remember what he did to Joseph when Joseph was a young man, teenager? He gives him a robe. Who remembers it? How's it described? Well, it says many colors, although the Hebrew text says the robe of the palms of the feet, which suggests not a multicolored robe. I think that comes from the Greek Septuagint, which is the translation. The Hebrew text says the robe that reaches to the palms of the feet, which suggests again what about Joseph?
Royalty.
Royalty. He would not have to work the farm. He was going to be the manager. Because you don't do farm work or nomadic, which they shepherding work with a long robe. And you have this phrase in the Old Testament, when wars fought, they girded up their loins, which they'd pull up their robes and tie it around their waist so they could run and fight. See, the robe would get them all tangled up. As you see in Saudi Arabia and countries like that today with their long robes. So you got to gird them up if you want to work. So from the beginning, Joseph was viewed as the firstborn, the favored one, the one who would inherit rights. And when Jacob is dying, who does he call? Joseph. And you know, I suppose we could say here, with all due respect to the other brothers, we do not have any evidence here in the text at this point that the other brothers do what they did many years earlier. And what's that? That's probably not a clear question. Get jealous and angry with Joseph. There's nothing said. They have apparently learned their lesson. Let the father do what he's going to do. He's the father. Who has the right to sass off to your mother or your father if they decide to give something to one of their children, not another? Right? That may not be the right thing to do all the time. I don't know, but whatever. In Jacob's case, a legitimate argument could be made for preferring Joseph over the others. He was the son of the wife that Jacob had chosen. And it wasn't his fault that Laban had ripped him off and given him the wrong woman. And again, I don't understand that story, how that happened. Anyway, he was in the tent with her all night and never figured out it was Rachel. Oh well, that wasn't Rachel. You had to be there, I guess. One of those things. Be there, done that, whatever.
History-wise, it was the famine that why Joseph and God didn't take that chance to turn the whole country of Egypt into a Jewish nation, giving God the glory for saving everyone. You know, it's about 1,000 years later that Islamic religion started out.
I don't know if everybody's hearing you back there. His basic point, if I'm summarizing, is why didn't God use the famine or stop the famine so Egypt would?
Well, yeah, he saved the people. It was famine time, so he at that time there was a chance he could have had everybody worship God at that
in
time.
Egypt.
He became Jewish in Egypt because Muhammad, the Islamic religion, actually was founded in strength out of the famine that we took in, and somehow his family at that time had saved up great grains and made everyone worship him and serve, and that's how the original...
Well, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but you know, number one, God had not promised the people Egypt. He promised them Israel. The second thing, Israel was a little tiny country with no power at all disunified. And I think God usually likes to work in situations where it appears to be impossible. And he makes Israel, in time of Solomon, rise to be a powerful nation, this little tiny community. The other thing is, if you know anything about the Fertile Crescent, you have what is today Iran, Iraq, Persia over there. You got the Arabian Desert. Nobody went through the desert. They always went, the merchants, up through the north and came down through the Holy Land into Egypt and back and forth. That's how it worked. So in the days of David and Solomon, they were right there on that major throughway into Egypt and back into Asia, or back into Iran, Iraq, etc., Mesopotamia, which meant that David and Solomon taxed the life out of all merchants. That's one of the reasons Israel became so powerful. So I think there are other reasons, Dana, why that didn't happen, but your question is an interesting one. We always wonder, actually we wonder at the time, let's step back. See, we know the history now, let's step back. What is he thinking? Why doesn't he just make Egypt the center of power? They already had everything in place, didn't they? They had kings, they had armies, they had troops. Israel could have just taken over Egypt. Why not do that? Well, God has his reasons. He likes to work in these strange ways, you know. And at the time, it's a good point to make this application. At the time, we wonder, what is he thinking? And then years later, you look back and say, now I see. I think with this story, it's the same thing. Jacob prepares for his death. He calls Joseph in. We got a tough little idiom there in verse 29. Let's see. If I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh. What is going on there? Who understands that idiom? Well, I better not talk about having children here. You see, the custom in the ancient world there was you always, I remember my prof told us this in Hebrew class back in college. It was all guys, so we could talk about this. But actually, they reached up under the robe and grabbed fellows' genitals, you see. And because that was a source of life, and a source of power, and you held on to, it's a euphemism here, grab the thigh, and that's how they made their oaths. See, we're too squeamish about that. That kind of stuff. But that's what it means. It was a very dramatic way to make an oath, you see. And so Jacob says, put your hand under my thigh and swear to me. You see, and so